Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. And you'll never miss a story again. I never used to believe in betrayal. I thought that sort of thing happened in courtroom dramas and paperback thrillers, not in real life. Definitely not in my life. I was Colton Baird, forensic sculptor, federal consultant, husband and son. A man who made a career out of reconstructing the faces of the long dead to bring justice to families who had waited too long for answers. I was trained to see what others couldn't, to read truth in the shape of a jawbone or the angle of an orbital socket. But I never saw this coming. Not from her, not from him. It started with silence. Not the dramatic kind that comes before a storm, but the slow, creeping kind. The kind that worms its way into your home and takes up space at the dinner table. Lana wasn't speaking to me much lately. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of her design firm's new client. Then it was a migraine, then a work trip, then another one. But I wasn't suspicious. Not yet. She had this way of brushing me off with a soft hand on my arm, a kiss on the cheek, and a promise to talk tomorrow. I told myself she loved me. We'd built so much together, our careers, our home in Annapolis, our little traditions, Sunday morning bagels, Thursday movie nights. I held on to those as proof. You don't fake bagel mornings. Then one evening, I came home early. I'd been called off a consultation with the FBI because the remains they brought in weren't human, just deer bones, bleached by sun and time. So I drove back early, hoping to surprise Lana with Thai takeout from her favorite spot downtown. I pushed open the door to our house, half expecting her to be on the couch in sweatpants, hair in a bun, sketching on her tablet. Instead, I walked into silence, but not the comforting kind. There was a faint scent in the air. Cologne. Not mine. I followed instinct, not logic, up the stairs. Her office door was ajar. I knocked softly and pushed it open. Empty. Her laptop was open. Odd for her to leave it unsecured, but I didn't think much of it until I glanced at the screen. A video call window had just closed. I wasn't going to snoop. But a message notification blinked in the corner. I didn't want to look, but I did. The preview read, "I wish we could just run away together. He'll never suspect anything from us. After all, he trusts us both." It was signed with a single letter. GG as in Gavin. My father. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe for a moment. Number, that couldn't be right. It had to be some kind of misunderstanding. A joke? No, not Gavin. He wasn't the joking type. He was a federal judge, honorable, respected. A man who spoke in measured tones and wore tailored suits like armor. He was the one who pushed me toward public service. Always said, "Truth has weight, Colton. Your job is to bear it." I guess he never warned me how much it could crush you. I didn't confront them right away. I should have, maybe. But instead, I watched, listened, learned. I put the skills I normally used for uncovering the identities of the dead to work on the living, my own family. First, I retrieved metadata from Lana's call history, cross-referenced timestamps with Gavin's known appearances, court schedules, news interviews, speaking engagements. Too many gaps lined up. I bugged the living room lamp using a hidden mic I kept in my studio, more out of professional habit than paranoia. The first time I heard them together over the mic, I was alone in my studio. Lana's voice, low, affectionate. Gavin's, confident, paternal, but dripping with something I'd never heard from him before. Not when he spoke to me. I listened to my wife laugh with my father. They spoke in half sentences, referred to the plan, something about transfers being handled. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just infidelity, this was deeper, bigger. One phrase hit me like a gut punch. "He'll never go digging." Colton's too absorbed in his skeletons. I replayed that moment over and over, not out of masochism, out of necessity, because it confirmed something. They were counting on me to be blind. They thought I'd never look into the family trust, never question why my mother's old property in Bethesda had suddenly been sold, never wonder why funds had been transferred from accounts I hadn't accessed in years. But they were wrong. I had stopped seeing faces as clues and started seeing patterns. And patterns don't lie. I began pulling court records, not just Gavin's cases, but ones that passed through his courtroom in the last 5 years. I started noticing names, obscure ones, popping up across multiple unrelated proceedings. Shell companies, mysterious settlements. It didn't make sense until I saw that two of the companies were linked to design contracts, ones that Lana's firm had supposedly won in open competition. They weren't winning them. Gavin was engineering it, fast-tracking decisions, ruling on cases that quietly dismissed other contenders. He was stacking the deck in her favor, and the financial gain enormous. At this point, I knew what I had to do. I had to gather proof, real, undeniable, prosecutable proof. But I couldn't go to the authorities yet. Gavin had friends in every branch. So I created my own kind of courtroom. I started with a 3D reconstruction. Not of a skull this time, but of a narrative. Using call logs, text messages, court documents, and bank transfers, I built a timeline. I even created a visual model of how Gavin's influence bled into Lana's design firm, turning her from a struggling creative into a millionaire in less than 3 years. And then I found the last piece, a deposition, one that had been sealed by court order, a whistleblower from a case involving a collapsed housing project in Baltimore. 3 people had died, construction shortcuts, bribed inspectors. The company behind it had disappeared, absorbed by a shell corporation, owned by Gavin, and approved by a contract signed by Lana's firm. Murder. That's what it was. Not directly, but in the way that corruption kills from behind a curtain. I was holding a bomb. I could have gone public then, leaked it to a journalist, handed it to a prosecutor. But I wanted them to see me. I wanted to look Gavin in the eyes and watch the mask fall. I wanted Lana to hear my voice, not as her husband, but as the man whose life she helped burn down. So I chose the one night they would never expect, the Washington Civic Gala, an annual event celebrating pillars of justice and architecture. This year, Gavin was the keynote speaker. Lana was being honored for innovative urban design, and I, Colton Baird, was presenting a visual exhibit on forensic artistry. Or so they thought. I spent weeks building my exhibit. It looked innocent enough. A digital reconstruction of a mystery case and a walkthrough of my creative process. But at the end, I embedded the real reveal, an interactive timeline called Behind the Mask. I linked it to a QR code printed on the gala brochure. That night, I wore my best suit, shook hands, smiled at people who didn't know they were sipping champagne in the blast radius of a truth bomb. I watched Lana take the stage, saw her glow under the lights. She looked like the woman I fell in love with. Only now I knew the shadows behind her smile. Then Gavin spoke. He quoted Shakespeare, of course, talked about justice and dignity, about carrying the weight of the law with honor. I waited until his speech ended, until the applause faded. Then I walked to the exhibit screen, tapped the final button, and turned the volume on. The timeline began to play. Faces, dates, bank records, maps, audio clips. I didn't say a word, but I watched as their faces changed, and that was only the beginning. I wish I could describe the sound the room made when the timeline started playing. It wasn't a gasp, not all at once anyway. It was more like a murmur that began on one side of the room and then swelled, rolling across the polished floors like a rising tide. The faces of Washington's elite, judges, attorneys, architects, city planners, turned slowly toward the exhibit, where images flashed in sequence. Screenshots of messages, excerpts from financial statements, dotted lines connecting shell companies to high-profile contracts, and then the audio. Colton's too absorbed in his skeletons. That line, Lana's voice. I wasn't standing at the screen anymore. I'd stepped back into the crowd, blending into it. I watched Gavin rise from his seat, trying to keep his posture straight, but his eyes were scanning the room. Lana was frozen beside him. Her smile had vanished completely. I knew what they were thinking. How much had I shown? Was it too late to stop it? The answer was, it was already done. The QR code printed in the brochure had given every guest access to the same file. And the file wasn't hosted on some private server. It was public, immutable, already mirrored in cloud backups and shared with several trusted contacts. If anything happened to me, it would only spread further. Still, that moment at the gala wasn't about the legal fallout. It was personal. I needed them to feel the walls closing in before the walls even arrived. And from the looks on their faces, they did. I didn't stay long. I left quietly while the board members were still trying to shut down the display, and Lana was pulling Gavin into a side hallway with panicked whispers. But the next part wasn't quiet. The next part was noise. That night, my phone buzzed with messages. Unknown numbers, reporters, former colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly remembering I existed. I let them all go to voicemail. I knew it wasn't over. That night wasn't my victory. It was only the beginning of a long game. If I'd learned anything from Gavin, it was that people in power don't fall easily. They stall, they threaten, they fight dirtier than you think possible. So I planned for that, too. The next morning, I met with two people, Hannah Miles, an investigative journalist I trusted, and Detective Marcus Ellery, a local officer I'd worked with years ago on a cold case involving a missing girl in Prince George's County. Marcus owed me one, and he had access to things I didn't. They were both shocked, not just by the evidence, but by the source. This is federal-level stuff, Marcus said, flipping through the printed pages I'd compiled into a timeline binder. How long have you been sitting on this? Long enough to know they won't go quietly. He gave me a look, half impressed, half worried. Colton, you sure you're ready for what comes next? No, I said, but I'm not walking away. Within 48 hours, Hannah's article went live. It didn't name me outright, but it cited an anonymous whistleblower from inside the justice and architectural planning community. It was clean, sharp, devastating. She had the receipts. She'd verified the court documents, tracked the shell companies, and published a map of suspicious contract approvals traced directly to Lana's firm and Gavin's rulings. And that's when the real unraveling began. Gavin gave a press statement. He called the article sensational, unfounded, and a politically motivated attack. He didn't mention me. Not yet. But Lana went dark. No interviews, no comments. Her company's website was taken offline within the day. But the most surprising move came next. A subpoena. Not for me, but for Gavin. Filed by a state prosecutor's office in Maryland. Marcus had apparently pulled some strings, shared what he could. It wasn't enough to convict anyone, not yet. But it was enough to open a case. And for the first time, I saw a crack in Gavin's armor. He reached out to me. It came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered by one of his clerks, folded into a heavy envelope embossed with his seal. Colton, we should talk. This doesn't need to play out in public. There are things you don't understand, things your mother never told you. If you want the truth, not just what you think you know, meet me. Sunday, 9 p.m., our old cabin. G. I read the letter 4 times. I hadn't been to the cabin since I was 17. It was on the edge of the Chesapeake, buried in a tangle of pine trees and foggy memories. It used to be a place of peace. I wasn't sure what it was now. I debated going. I knew it could be a trap. Not a physical one, Gavin wouldn't go that far, but an emotional one. He could talk his way out of anything. It was how he won cases, arguments, even my admiration. But I went anyway. Not because I trusted him, because I needed to see if there was any version of him left that I could understand. When I pulled up to the cabin, the porch light was on. A small fire flickered inside the hearth, and Gavin was already seated, staring into it like he was trying to find something in the flames. He looked older. Not just tired, but worn thin, like a portrait losing its sharpness. "You came," he said without turning. "I came to listen," I replied. He gestured for me to sit, and for a while, there was only the sound of the fire crackling. Then he spoke. "It didn't start the way you think it did," he said. "Lana didn't seduce me. I pursued her." I said nothing. "She reminded me of your mother," he continued. "Before the illness, before she forgot who we were. You don't remember, but I lost her long before she died. Lana brought something back. I know it's no excuse." "You stole from me," I said finally. "Not just her. You stole years, trust. You twisted justice for profit." "I did," he said, no denial. "I justified it at first. Told myself I was helping her firm survive. Helping us survive. But I crossed the line long ago. 3 people died in Baltimore, Gavin. You helped cover that up." His face changed at that. A flicker of something. Was it regret? Or just fear of what I might still have? "I didn't know," he said. "Not until after. By then, it was too late to pull back without exposing the entire chain. So I buried it, and I hated myself for it. I stood. I couldn't sit anymore. Couldn't listen to his justifications. Then why reach out to me now?" I asked. "Why the letter?" He looked up at me. "Because you're going to testify, and I want you to have the full story before you do." He slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. Not then. But I took it with me when I left. Back home, I opened the folder and found copies of internal memos, personal notes, even transcripts from conversations he'd recorded without Lana's knowledge. One page stood out. A list of city inspectors who had been paid off, signed contracts, hidden escrow accounts. Most of it matched what I'd already found, but some of it went deeper. Names I hadn't recognized. Companies that were still active. This wasn't just about Gavin and Lana anymore. It was a network. And Gavin, he'd been keeping score the whole time. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of insurance. I didn't know what to do with that. But I knew one thing. The courtroom confrontation I'd imagined. It wasn't going to be just about them. It was going to shake the city. Maybe more. And I had one final move to make. The morning of the hearing felt unreal. It wasn't a trial, not yet. But it was a public inquiry. One of those preliminary investigations where evidence gets aired and the state decides whether to escalate. But in Washington, nothing is truly preliminary. Cameras would be watching. Reputations would be weighed. And for people like Gavin Baird, even being summoned was a kind of public judgment. I stood in front of the mirror, tying my tie like I'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, it wasn't for a gala or a wedding or a professional event. It was for something heavier, a reckoning. I wasn't scheduled to speak that day, just listed as an evidence consultant. But the state prosecutor had warned me privately. "We may call on you if your testimony is needed for clarity." Clarity. That was one way to describe what I'd lived through. Lana hadn't reached out. Not once since the gala. Her firm had been dissolved. Employees let go. She was under scrutiny, yes, but Gavin had drawn most of the attention. Some assumed she'd been manipulated. Others believed she was the mastermind. The truth, as usual, lived somewhere in between. I walked into the hearing room and felt the weight of the space immediately. It was one of those grand civic chambers. High ceilings, dark wood panels, columns that made everything seem older and more official than it really was. Rows of reporters sat along the back. Gavin sat at a long table near the front, his lawyers on either side of him. He looked composed. But I knew that look. It was a mask. I'd worn it too. The lead prosecutor began with a calm voice. She laid out the charges being considered: abuse of judicial power, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of investigation. It was clinical, surgical. Each sentence was a careful cut. Then came the evidence. They presented Gavin's sealed communications, the shell companies, the unusual pattern of rulings. They highlighted Lana's firm, the contracts, the connections to failed developments, including the housing collapse in Baltimore that left 3 families shattered. When they called me forward, it felt like the air in the room changed. I wasn't just a witness. I was his son. Please state your name for the record, the clerk asked. Colton Baird. And your professional background? Forensic sculptor and legal consultant. I specialize in facial reconstruction from skeletal remains for identification and criminal investigations. A pause. And your relation to the respondent? My father. That was the first moment Gavin looked at me directly. Not coldly, not defiantly, but almost human. I felt something twist inside me. Not pity, not rage, just the strange ache of someone who once loved a man who didn't truly exist. The prosecutor asked about the digital exhibit I'd created for the gala. I walked them through it, calm, neutral, like I was describing a case file from years ago. I explained how I connected the dots, not just as a son betrayed, but as someone trained to look beyond the obvious. They asked if I had any final statement. I hadn't prepared one, but I spoke anyway. When I was a boy, I began, my father taught me that truth has weight, that it costs something to carry. I believed him. I still do. What hurts is realizing that he forgot his own words. I let the silence settle. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to stop destroying himself, and everyone tied to him. There are people who died because of what he buried. Families who never got answers. This isn't just about financial misconduct or moral failure. It's about justice being twisted so far it cracked. And then I said the last part, softly. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because the truth deserves light. When I stepped down, Gavin didn't speak. He just sat there, silent, unmoving. They broke for recess shortly after. I stepped into the hall, where reporters were waiting like a wall of static. I ignored their questions and kept walking. Outside, the sky was heavy with cloud. One of those gray days where the light feels filtered, like the sun itself is uncertain. I found a bench near the courthouse steps and sat. That's when Lana appeared. I didn't know she was coming. She wore a long coat and sunglasses, trying to be invisible, but I knew her silhouette. She stood a few feet away, unsure. Can I sit? She asked. I nodded. For a while, we didn't say anything. Then she pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked old, weathered. She handed it to me without a word. I opened it. It was one of her sketches, from years ago. A house, not ours, one we never built. A dream design. There were notes scribbled in the margin. Light-facing window, breakfast nook, 2-person studio space. It was, from the time we still believed in shared futures. I didn't plan for it to happen, she said. Not the way it did. But you let it happen. I know. She looked down. I wanted more. I wanted to succeed. I didn't think it would get so dark. 3 people died, Lana. She nodded. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. I live with that every day. I folded the paper and handed it back. Keep it, she said. It was real once. And then she walked away. That was the last time I saw her. The inquiry concluded with enough evidence to recommend full prosecution. Gavin was formally charged 3 weeks later, his name removed from the bench. He made no public statement. His attorneys handled everything. Quiet settlements followed. Investigations branched out into city planning departments, zoning boards, architectural review commissions. The scandal rippled through every layer. And me? I went back to work, quietly, carefully. I returned to the cases I knew how to solve, the quiet bones, the forgotten victims. It was strange in a way. After everything, I found comfort in the work of rebuilding faces, restoring identity to those who couldn't speak for themselves. Justice in the smallest, most human way. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing them. The answer is no. But I do mourn what I lost. Not Lana, not even Gavin. I mourn the illusion. The belief that family is an unbreakable bond. That truth alone can fix what's broken. Now I know better. Truth doesn't fix things. It just makes them clear. And sometimes, that's all we get. But clarity, even when it hurts, is better than living in the dark. And I will never go blind again.